Thank you very much. We have a wonderful panel lined up here, which I hope will reflect on some of the challenges that Jomo has outlined in his last slide, including how we can contribute to achieving zero hunger and what the different partnerships, the different modalities, the ways in which we mobilize at different levels. Introduce our and them each in turn. Our first panel is Nabeeha Kazi. Nabeeha is chair of the Community for Zero Hunger, which is a global multi-sectoral initiative designed to respond to the UN Zero Hunger Challenge. She is also president and CEO of Humanitas Global. Our second panelist is Richard Green. He is a senior deputy assistant administrator for the Bureau of Food Security at USAID. Our third panelist is Sam Worthington. Sam is the president and CEO of InterAction, the nation's largest alliance of relief and development non-governmental organizations that are working overseas. And our fourth panelist, you have all heard from him, and that is Jomo Kwame Sundaram. What I would like to do is to facilitate a conversation between our panelists for 1 or 2 or 3 rounds, and then we come to you. And I'd like to begin with Nabeeha. Nabeeha, the Community for Zero Hunger has been set up explicitly to achieve the Zero Hunger Challenge. So can you tell us more about how you go about doing that? What are some of the things the organization is working with? And now start off the conversation.
Sure. So thank you for having us. And thank you for all of the comments. You know, quite frankly, when the Secretary General announced the Zero Hunger Challenge, he asked all sectors to step it up, and he asked for everyone to play a role in this. And those who make up the community, many who are in the audience, many who are watching us, including my fellow advisor, Sam Worthington, who is on the panel, listened to that call to action. And we said, okay, it's time for us to step it up. So essentially, we have 3 core action steps as part of this independent response, independent community response to the Zero Hunger Challenge. And the first one is identifying the context-specific gaps and challenges informed by local level practitioners and country-level networks. 2 is doing an experience and asset mapping to really understand what are the most innovative ideas, experiences, capacities, capabilities that could be deployed to really fill some of those context-specific gaps. And number 3, which I think is probably the most important piece of this, is setting communities into motion to mobilize and integrate some of these shovel-ready or scale-ready, evidence-informed, evidence-based efforts to get us to the finish line of ending hunger and malnutrition once and for all.
Thank you very much. May I come to you, Sam, next? And as you also talk about interaction, perhaps you say a few words on how you see CSOs mobilizing.
I was sort of looking at this, and first for the opportunity to be here and the knowledge that these goals cannot be achieved unless you're seeing a collaboration between nation states, the UN system, the private sector, civil society, and it really does take this whole society approach to deal with these issues. We've been engaging at the policy level. Some of it's been mirroring the efforts of SUN. We stood up the 1,000 Days Partnership to get a significant focus on the issues of undernutrition, engaging with the U.S. government in the shaping of the policy of Feed the Future, really getting that policy focus as much as we can on the smallholder woman farmer. The other bit is the U.S. NGOs bring resources. We made a pledge of $1 billion a couple of years ago for a 3-year commitment for food security. The first year expenditures was roughly around $350 million of private expenditure by U.S. NGOs. And then we complemented that with a $750 million pledge focusing on nutrition. And we intend in the coming months to increase that significantly and looking at a way of leveraging and doing an MOU with the U.S. government. Because the key here, at least from my vantage point, that civil society cannot be acting on its own. It needs to be part of and working with other actors. But I think the part of this is really then comes down to the partnerships. It means figuring out how best to work with the private sector. Where do they play within this mix? How do we help smallholder farmers reach up to markets in a way that's effective, particularly those that are not taking advantage of those markets? And this gets to my last point, which is the issue of practice. We've partnered with IFPRI and others on what are the best practices in terms of reaching the most marginalized, hungry people. And to me, this is the heart of the Zero Hunger Challenge, because it's about zero hunger, which ultimately means you're trying to reach populations that have not been reached before.
Thank you very much, Sam. We come to you, Jomo. You shared with us the whole problem and where we want to go. But come back to FAO for a moment, and what would you want to share with us in terms of how FAO is stepping up to this challenge? How are you coordinating? What assets you bring that you didn't have a chance to comment on earlier?
Well, as far as FAO is concerned, what we are seeing beginning from this month is the implementation of what is called the reviewed strategic framework. The reviewed strategic framework has established some new priorities for the organization going forward. And many of these priorities, in fact, I would say all the priorities relate very much to the Zero Hunger Challenge as articulated by the Secretary General. What is also being emphasized is the need for much greater collaboration across the different divisions and different departments within the organization to achieve the desired results. But this kind of collaboration also needs to be taken outside, not just within Rome with the so-called other Rome-based agencies, IFPRI and the World Food Programme, but throughout the UN system and beyond. Ultimately, of course, much of the effect of FAO's work is really in whether or not it is translated into changes of policies at the level of national governments. In this day and age, you'll be surprised that there's a very little sense of food policy in many governments. Many governments do not have a clear food policy. Agriculture ministries, with whom the FAO interacts with a great deal, are often concerned about maximizing agricultural incomes. That might involve cash crop production for export rather than attending to food security kinds of concerns. So the need to work across government and to be able to have a shared sense of achieving policies which are not the preserve of any one agency of government or any one ministry of government is a major challenge. This is especially acute in addressing the nutrition challenges, for example. With nutrition, you need clean water, because if you don't have potable water, you're likely to have gastrointestinal diseases, and no matter how nutritious your food intake is, most of it will come out, it will not be absorbed by the human body. You also need a number of other interventions. In most countries, whatever little is done on nutrition is usually handled in a health ministry. The health ministry rarely coordinates with agricultural ministries or with other kinds of ministries. So this kind of need for what is sometimes referred to as multi-sectoral cooperation and collaboration is extremely important in terms of trying to encourage governments to begin to address these old problems in new ways.
Thank you very much. What I would like to do is not just go one by one by one. So I'd like to ask two things. One, please feel free to ask each other or comment on each other's interventions. And the second is I will take the prerogative to start the conversation going with one or two bold questions. And the question I have, and I don't know who of you wishes to pick it up, but builds on what Jomo just said. If we really want to achieve zero hunger, we're going to have to do something dramatically different, because we haven't quite got there with what we have been doing so far. Doing more of some things, doing less of some things, doing things differently, doing things with different partners. So I want to come back and ask you, what do you think we need to do differently? Because we are not quite getting there. What does this offer us, and what would we do?
So I agree with Richard, and I also, being the only woman on the panel, have to shout out for my sisters that we have to absolutely be better about having a women-focused, women-driven perspective, because the 5 elements of the UN Zero Hunger Challenge, women are at the center of that. So that would be my plug, that we have to be much more deliberate there.
I'll go 2 points. First, obviously, when you get to countries that have the capacity to engage in resources for their own populations, focus on hunger, they need plans to do that. The challenge is in fragile states where a large percentage of the poor, hungry people live, there we need to move beyond, and our community is primarily known for its humanitarian interventions, beyond humanitarian interventions to a link to broader resilience strategies, and resilience strategies that are ultimately rooted in smallholder farmers and their ability to cope with the climate and other shocks that are hitting them.
If I can come in and support Nabeeha, I think the role of women is especially important because very few people realize that the majority of small farmers are actually women. And also, women as mothers, women as caregivers are central to improving nutrition. And so we really need to do things very differently. Just to provide some examples, we now have quite a bit in terms of formal nutrition education. We have formal nutrition education in universities and schools and so on and so forth. But there is a great deal more which needs to be done and can be done. And the kind of soft power which the US has, for example, in Hollywood and the entertainment industries, this is extremely important. The most important instrument for agricultural extension work in the UK is a radio program. Now, that started right after the end of the Second World War. For today, television, the new forms of communication, all provide us with huge opportunities. There's a very important initiative called Digital Green, for example. Now, something similar could be done on nutrition, for example. What we now have is, in many countries, midwives are being trained. Midwives also need nutrition training so that these can be conveyed to expectant mothers, and not only in the antenatal phase, but also in the postnatal phase, because it is really the first 1,000 days of development from conception to about the age of 2, which are very, very crucial in terms of the kinds of interventions. So what do we do in terms of educating those people? So many of these issues which are now well recognized, but we really need to do much more and much more innovatively to tackle these problems.
You raise a number of key issues: the importance of communication, the importance of engagement, the importance of bringing and making sure that the national leaders, because if they don't own this, it's not going to get very far. So I reflect on a conversation I had with Sam just a little bit earlier, which was these are 800+ million people. You limited resources. Where do you really invest in? You know, we can start everywhere and get paralyzed very quickly, as I think we currently are. So I come to you, Sam, for a moment, to this conversation we just had. Where do we, who invests where? Do you have thoughts on that? And then we have the conversation.
Well, ultimately, it is about leveraging multiple resources and where do you add value of leveraging resources. And if you're a Brazil or you're in India and so forth, it's working with the private sector, and to the extent to which you're reaching into local civil society with your own resources. Our challenge comes in parts of the world where there aren't those resources, and this is where I think the UN system comes in, the international donors come in, and have to play a role, but I think it's key there that role is not displacing the building of local capacity in such a way that that intervention is enabling over time a better both societal resilience. And I think one of the things I was sort of listening to when we're talking here, sort of one of the barriers that, at least from my vantage point, comes out, most extension workers are male. Most smallholder farmers that are hungry are women. To what extent are we engaging the most grassroots level of civil society in this process? And that is difficult for governments. It involves a role of perhaps civil society and nation states, but I think the conversation and who is involved in the conversation in shaping the direction to eliminate zero hunger has to involve those small farmer cooperatives who ultimately are going to make a change for their own families.
Yeah, the question you ask is a bit of a difficult one for me personally to answer, because what gives us the right to decide where we make the biggest bang for our buck? especially with the bold call that there should be zero hunger. Everyone has the right to access nutritious food. And I think, building on what Sam just said, if we are to achieve this bold vision, it's finding multiple conduits and multiple ways in, so it's not policy driven exclusively. So we do have a very empowered, well-informed community engagement, that we have different partners who are acting as equals and as peers. And all of this needs to come together simultaneously. And I think that's, the bigger question of how do we do that effectively?
So what's your thought on Jomo's point about communications? I had this vision of Hollywood, younger women, not just Meryl Streep.
Yeah.
But how do you think of, what's the role of, how do you get the culture?
Yeah, and I think the piece of this is making it real, making it aspirational. I've had this deep desire with my Humanitas hat on that, what if we got the first ladies of key countries and their friends? What if we got the celebrities? What if we got, the people that the community folks look up to, are interested in, and showed these women breastfeeding proudly? We have to show that this is accessible and also position these interventions and what we want to achieve in a way that's not going to add burden to their lives.
Mm-hmm. I want to slightly turn, Richard, did you want to come in? Otherwise, I slightly
go
turn.
ahead.
I want to slightly turn the conversation. And Jomo, you presented as 5 elements of the Zero Hunger Challenge. And I want to ask you, in these 5 elements, and they're running the gamut from nutrition to food waste and so forth. How do you see them coming together in terms of innovative action? Where do we focus on nutrition? Richard said very rightly, right there, prominent. But how do you bring the pieces together? And any thoughts on that?
I'm very hesitant to provide any kind of universal prescriptions. I think a lot of the coordination will be very context specific, whether the initiative is being done at the municipal level, or if it is being done at the national level, or even at the regional level, and so on and so forth. I think what needs to be done is often defined by context, not only in terms of capacities and capabilities, but also the challenges which are being faced. But I would like to emphasize a universal element, and those are rights. If we are serious about the right to development, if we are serious about the right to food, and this was something which Eleanor Roosevelt, the former First Lady, introduced, the Roosevelts were very, very crucial to the setting up of all the major international institutions after the end of the Second World War, ranging from the IMF and the World Bank in this town to the FAO, which was, although the first meeting was held in Canada, it was very much inspired by the US experience, and the US has continued to have a very, very strong influence in the development of not only of the FAO, but the other Rome-based agencies. The late Senator McGovern, for example, was one who continued this kind of role. But what does it mean to realize the right to food in this day and age? The challenges today are very different because the context is different from the context which existed in the mid-40s. So realizing that right to food is something which brings together questions of social protection, for example. The food stamp program is one example of a early social protection initiative pioneered in this country, which has been emulated in a few countries. If we look at India, for example, India has had about 5 different generations of initiatives: the public delivery system, public food delivery system, and then the targeted system, and then subsequently they experimented with what was called NREGA, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, and then after that with cash transfers, and most recently the Right to Food Act. What are the obstacles which we face there? And this is where there is a tremendous role for organizations such as IFPRI and others who are looking at these kinds of questions to help to inform the public. So while important research is being done here, very few people are going to read obscure journals, academic journals. What they are going to read are the kinds of things which, what are on the talk shows, what are the op-ed pieces, and so on and so forth. So there is, I think, while many of the issues and the questions and the principles are old and enduring, what is really needed is a response to the new situation, which are going to make the difference, and which will be able to move the Zero Hunger Challenge forward.
I've been sort of focusing at the grassroots level. Let me go completely to the other direction. It comes down to political will. And political will could come from many places. And Shangan mentioned the sort of loss of GDP that's associated with this. It's been interesting in the government of Guatemala, a realization of the loss of GDP and their future as a country because of the stunting that exists within their population, and elevating the issue of stunting and access to food as something that is central to the broad development of their country and their future well-being. So it's shifting this from something that's we need to sort of pay attention to this. It's a moral good to this is something that is central to our ability as a country and so forth. And that political will has to be echoed by people like the ones in this room, so that there's a constant sort of echo and pressure saying this can be done, you can act on it, and it's in your own interest.
You want to come in, Nabeeha?
You know, I wanted to just emphasize very quickly, and then would love to hear feedback, of course, from the audience, but I think we have to also recognize that the power of partnership is tremendous, and we have wonderful initiatives already underway with 1,000 Days, Scaling Up Nutrition, Feed the Future, the new alliance that really rely on the power of partnership. But I'll also say that I think we're just scratching the surface here. And there is an opportunity to go even deeper and to be very deliberate and define, quite frankly, the roles and the contributions of the private sector, of civil society members, of the public sector. How do we all mobilize very specifically to support the Zero Hunger Challenge? You know, that's at the heart of the Community for Zero Hunger as well, to be able to do that. Also identify those long and short-term goals and milestones so we make this as real and actionable as possible. And finally, you know, to Richard's point as well, we have to be incredibly deliberate about sharing the tremendous knowledge that we already have, the evidence that we already have, because we're not shooting in the dark anymore. We know what's out there. We just have to apply it in a context that is appropriate and scale it as quickly as possible.